Hi, hello all. Welcome to today's webinar, Rendezvous, on the topic Deciding with Confidence in 2026. It's basically related with taking risk in changing the world. Okay, so we are truly pleased to welcome our presenter, Courtney, a highly, a very well-versed person in financial sector. He has, 3 decades of experience across Caribbean, East Africa, and Bermuda related with all these financial sector things. So Courtney had held senior roles in institutions such as the Bank of Jamaica, the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and the International Monetary Fund, where he supported countries in strengthening financial stability, risk based supervision, and risk management frameworks. His work has directly shaped decision making and risk management at national and international levels. So, beyond his professional leadership, Courtney is also a researcher, mentor, and a author, known for translating complex financial and leadership challenges into practical and real world insights. So today we are explore to know how to take a confident decision, take calculated risk in 2026. So we couldn't have more fitting voice to guide us other than Courtney. So please join me in warmly welcoming Courtney. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this very kind words of welcome. I'm excited to be the presenter for the first webinar of 2026, and very fitting topic. Um, and it take in terms of deciding with confidence in 2026. I want to start by saying that, the presentation is not about reckless risk taking. It is about intentional, informed risk taking and in our personal lives, in organizations, and in public institutions at a time when uncertainty has become the norm rather than the exception. Just monitoring the World Economic Outlook, which I frequently look at in terms of my work and presentation that I have to do to risk committees and investment committees, and it is really starting to see every time in the last I think 4 quarters, I would say, and even before, the highlight of uncertainty in the world, whether that's about tariffs, about war, about infrastructure damage due to climate change, hurricane, is just a lot of uncertainty. So it's important that we are looking at this topic in terms of deciding with confidence in 2026. Taking risks in 2026, why courage, judgment, and timing matters? No, more than ever. And the topic is important for us. And why does it matter in 2026? Because the world feels more uncertain than ever. Familiar rules no longer guarantee safety, and inaction now carries risk. Inaction is inertia. Inaction is very risky. Risk is no longer optional. It is unavoidable today. The world is more uncertain than to ever. I mean, I remember, just growing up in rural Jamaica, and things were like, okay, it's like it was predictable. Every day you get up, you get ready, you do some chores, you go out, you go to school. Very predictable routine. But now it's different. I mean, in our lifetime we have seen so many different so many different manifestation of uncertainties, and so many risks. If we look at it that way, we have seen the fall of the Berlin Wall, we have seen the fall of apartheid in South Africa, we have been through a pandemic, a global pandemic. We have been through, there are incidents of cyber attack, which is just astronomical. And so there's so much uncertainty now. And so we have to grapple with that. We have to deal with that. And what we're familiar with is no longer guarantee safety. Risk is often misunderstood. And I really want us to think about that in a way. Risk is not about bravado. It is about decisive decision making under uncertainty. A skill every leader, professional, and individual must now develop. We don't have the luxury of thinking that risk is just something that's going to go away, that we can decide or not decide. We have to take it on. Risk is not being reckless. Back in the day, again, as young boys, you say, oh, you take too much risk because you're actually jumping from a tree, jumping into the river, and that is reckless. That's not risk. Risk is not gambling. A lot of persons say, oh yeah, I'm gonna be putting some money here, I'm gonna hope for the best, and I'm gonna make money from that. I'm putting something in stake, I'm gonna go to Vegas, etc. But that's not risk. That is not risk. That's gambling, which is not risk. Risk is acting without full certainty. And again, now more than ever, there's a lot of uncertainty. Therefore, there's a lot of reason to take risk. And risk is choosing despite incomplete information. That's just how it is. We have a lot of information. We are bombarded with information. There's a plethora of information about anything. I mean, like anything you want to know, you Google, you find it, chat GTP, AI, you can find it. But the important thing is that the information is not always complete. And now you have to decide which one to use for what cause, for what purpose. So there's a lot more to do there in terms of choosing when we're thinking of taking on risk. Let's look at personal risk, the human dimension, which is a very important aspect of the presentation. Personal risk taking includes career moves. It includes speaking up, leaving our comfort zones, starting again. Yes, and that's important. It's very difficult, but that's a part of what we have to do in terms of now saying yes or no decisively at pivotal moments. And my years before risk became institutional, it is personal. So we're going to talk about institutional risk later on in the presentation, but we want to talk about the personal aspect of risk. Every major professional journey begins with that individual decision to step into uncertainty. For me, um, I'm thinking that career moves. When I was first I remember leaving Jamaica to work abroad, and that was in 2007. My first experience working abroad, I got a job at the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and it's a very interesting story because at the time I worked at the Bank of Jamaica for about 9 years and maybe 3 months or so. And you're vested to get your pension when you have completed 10 years working at the central bank. And I got this job and the opportunity to work in Bermuda. And I remember I went to talk to my boss, and he said, Courtney, listen, this is a no-brainer. Go. This is something that everybody waits for in their life. This is the career move that people want. And but I was not certain. I wasn't full that I really wanted to go, because I said, okay, but why should I give up my pension? What's going to happen? So what I did was to talk with the governor at the time or seek audience with the governor, so I could discuss whether I could be seconded, because it's another regulatory authority body. So I had that discussion, but it was a no, we can't do that, Courtney. So I decided that, you know what, I have to take that risk. I have to move. I have to go. So I basically signed on to it. But I did not resign at the time. And the time that it takes in terms of the immigration process to move from Jamaica to Bermuda, a lot of medical, lot of back and forth with immigration, visa, relocation, etc. And before you know it, the time ran off, and I'd done 10 years at the Bank of Jamaica, and then I was able to move. So I was able to secure pension there to move. But the important point I want to make is that it was not without risks, and taking that risk that, okay, this is what I want to do. Career moves involve that taking moves. Speaking up is personal risk. We run the risk of being the outlier, the person in the room that everybody's going to be looking at because we are speaking up. We have seen a challenge and everybody else is quiet, and we said, no, it's okay. No, this is important for me. I'm going to have to speak up. So you take that personal risk, leaving your comfort zone, like I did when I was working with the Bank of Jamaica, to go to another territory, not knowing how pension would work and so on, and even to start again. A lot of persons from the Caribbean, we moved to they moved to North America, and for them it's like, wow, it's starting over, but they have done it, and they have done well there. So we have to be thinking through some of these issues of personal risk taking. Personal risk I took, leaving familiar environment, and this is in terms of my own journey within the IMF, leaving familiar environment, working across cultures and countries. So again, that's serious. Can you imagine working in the Caribbean for the IMF at the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, and having to service or to build capacity in 18 countries. So every 2 weeks during the 4 years I was at the center in the Caribbean, I was in another country. I was in Haiti, I was in Jamaica, I was in Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, I was in the Bahamas, I back to Bermuda, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos. You were just moving to all of these, and all of these are different countries with different cultures, and you have to build capacity. You have to engage with supervisors there, and they're different. And that's really the risk that you take. But it's a good risk, because at the end of it, you felt really secure. You felt confident, and that was that was important. And it's important when you take risks across cultures. You don't go unprepared. It's important that you prepare yourself, understand the people, understand the culture, understand the language if it's different, like in Haiti, where they speak where they speak French or Creole, and so forth, and understand, I mean, what do they eat, how do they talk, how do they dress, and that's really important in terms of when you take risk, to make sure you understand cultures, countries, accepting assignments without perfect clarity. A lot of us, we don't know what. No, I need to know what it is that I'm going to do. I need to have the job description. But if you notice at the end of all or most job description, there's something about additional tasks which may be assigned from time to time. You don't know what that is. But then you're going to say, okay, no, until you are clear, until you explain to me what that is, then I will not accept this assignment. No, you're losing and missing out on a lot of opportunity. And that's risk taking, accepting assignments, even though it's not clear at time, and you go and you figure it out. That's leadership. That's a positive risk culture. That's important. And making professional judgment under under pressure. That is great. Again, I remember I completed my assignment in Barbados after 4 years servicing 18 countries, and so there was time to move on, because you do get there's a kind of a tenure there, which is 3 years, and again, if by measure of good work, they can give you an additional year on your contract, which I got fourth year, and so there was an option. Like I had three options actually, and again, this is taking risk. I can go to Fiji to work. I can go to East Africa to work. I could go to another country. I think it was like more in East Asia that's there. And so, okay, so let me see now. How do I rank this in terms of the risk? Which one do I see is safe? Which one is familiar? And so on. So I decided to do my first choice, which was Fiji. So I would work in PIFTAC, which is a Pacific um, Technical Assistance Center. So I applied, I ranked them. So Fiji is my first option. East Africa in Tanzania is my second option. And the other country, don't remember which one it is now, is my third option. And so I remember doing the interview, being successful, getting a call from head office Washington to say, "Hey, Courtney, I want to update you on progress as to placements and next move, and I have good news and I have bad news for you." I said, "Oh my Lord, okay, give me the bad news first." And the lady said, I remember her very distinctly. The bad news is that you did not get your first choice. So you're not going to Fiji. I was kind of broken a bit because Fiji felt so much like the Caribbean, small islands, like a Caribbean culture, music and dance and so on. And so it was familiar environment for me, move from one similar set of countries to another similar set of countries. And then but the good news, she said, is that we are sending you to you get your second choice, which is to go to East Africa. And okay, all right, maybe not too bad, but I wasn't ready necessarily in my mind for Africa and for East Africa. But after moving to Tanzania, I realize that this has been the best, or one of the best decision that I didn't really make for myself, that somebody made for me in order to go to East Africa. Larger countries, you're talking about Kenya and Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, talking about Ethiopia, a lot of culture, diverse, and I like challenges. And so I realized that's it. I realized that it was even more, it's exciting. So working there again, you felt at home, which I didn't expect. You understand the country, you learn to talk a little Swahili, here and there, Abariako, how are you, Asante sana, thank you, etc. And the capacity building. I mean, those guys were thirsty for knowledge, and that was really an exciting opportunity for me, doing workshops and so on. So it's important that you think about personal risk is leaving familiar environment, because trust me, it can work out phenomenal for you. Working across cultures, again, accepting assignments without clarity, as we mentioned, and making professional judgment under under pressure. Why people avoid risk? Common barriers. So there's the fear of failure. And I think that that's almost like number one in my book. There's a fear of judgment, of course. There's loss of identity. You feel like, okay, you're not yourself. You're somebody else. And so if I'm doing this, I'm not gonna be myself. If I take this route, I'm not gonna be who I am. My identity, I'm not even too sure. And comfort with the familiar, and I spoke about that a bit earlier. Fear of failure. If I be honest, that is one of my 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 the reason that I would avoid risk, just that fear of failure. I grew up with particularly when I was working in the central bank in Jamaica, with this notion that failure is not an option. And we say it with pride. My colleagues would say, no, 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 no. Listen, failure is not an option. we are gonna be doing and so on. But I realized in latter part of my life, just working in across all these countries, working in East Africa, that yes, failure is an option, but you don't have to take that option. But you have to you can't just think that it doesn't exist and you're afraid of it. You have to, because that prevents you from taking risks. You have to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to dive in. Yes, there's a possibility that I may not do so well. The possibility I may get 50%, possibility of 30, possibility of 70, and so on. But it should not prevent you from actually jumping in. So that fear of failure really cripples a lot of persons, and therefore they just do not move and they can't maximize their real potential. And so it's important that we try to identify that barrier and deal with it. How do we circumvent it? How do we go around it? How do we kind of release ourselves of this phobia, of fear of judgment, what persons say, what stuff, I've a new saying nowadays in terms of people's opinion, of me, that that's not my business, that their business, so they have to deal with that. You know exactly who you are, and you're strong in who you are. Loss of identity as well as comfort with the familiar barriers, common barriers, and the why people avoid risk. Then there's healthy versus unhealthy risk taking. Healthy risk aligned with values. They are thought through clearly, and they're purpose driven. That's healthy risks. Um, Unhealthy personal risk, on the other hand, is ego driven. It's reactive, and it avoids accountability. And we have seen this in terms of our personal operation in business, how we navigate tasks, or we look at what it is that we're doing. And it's important when we think about risk from these perspective, healthy, unhealthy risk, and try to avoid the unhealthy risk, and to make sure that the healthy risk we give a lot of time and space and attention to those. um Aligning our risk with values, it's important. Just doing a lot on risk management. One of the things that, and concept that we'll come across very regularly, is risk appetite. And that speaks to just healthy risk. What is the appetite? How much risk can we take on? And based on my value, based on my beliefs, based on my personal value system, what are the risks that I can take on? How do I think through these risks, and just been driven, looking, okay, this is my purpose, that my values, and I am just propelled towards those goals, and those purpose. It's no time for ego. Ego is big, huge nowadays, and we see exactly a lot of the problem that we have in our personal lives, in business, in the community, in the world, because of ego and how ego driven persons are. Being reactive as opposed to proactive, again, that's unhealthy. Being reactive, always finding excuses, and taking action after the fact, and avoiding accountability. Accountability is very important. Checks and balance, because again, nobody's perfect. And if you go into situations, and think that, okay, no, I know it, it's perfect, and so on, you will not find that space to be accountable to no one. That's important. The habit to learn in terms of risk taking, and terms of this, being more accountable. That's there. The Okay, let's move to the next slide, and this is part 3: risk taking in organization and business. So here we want to look at now, move from a personal perspective to the business perspective in an organization. Every organization faces risk. There's strategic risk, financial risk, reputational risk, and people risk. And especially nowadays, reputational risk is so important because you can have a good reputation as an organization. Um, and then before you know it, with the advent of social media, your reputation has gone down. And the thing about reputation that we need to recognize is that information that is out there in the public about the firm doesn't have to be true as long as it is negative. So there is not about being truthful or this is fake, because it still can impact and damage, the reputation of a business. When I worked in East Africa, I learned of this case. I think it was 2013, became public knowledge of an institution that failed. It's called Chase Bank. And Chase Bank, a part of the reason why Chase Bank in Kenya had failed was reputational risk. So on social media, there was the information that was going around in Instagram, on your WhatsApp group, etc., that says, tell a friend to tell a friend to take their money from Chase Bank. It sounds much better in Swahili. And in 24 hours, less than 24 hours, the bank had collapsed because social media was so powerful. Information was moving, so people were just going online, taking their money. And trust me, everybody knows that in as much as a financial institution can survive a capital risk, so to speak, or solvency risk, inadequate capital, you cannot survive a liquidity risk that run like capital. They say it's like cancer. So you can go to the doctor said, okay, I'm sorry, you are suffering from cancer of whatever it is. It doesn't mean that you're going to die tomorrow. A lot of people, they have been living longer and longer and longer with the knowledge that they have cancer. However, you have a heart liquidity risk like a heart attack. It can just be severe. It can just take you out once, especially the massive heart attack. And that's the thing between liquidity risk and solvency risk. When we talk about financial risk. So that bank, Chase Bank, was not able to survive that reputational risk. So what did they do? The central bank said, you know what? All financial institutions, you must have a social media presence. You must have a reputational risk process and how it is that you're gonna identify, measure, manage, mitigate reputational risk. And because if information is out there, you have to have a response that's there. Whether you call the central bank and say, okay, together, let us go out and let us talk about this. So you can at least mitigate and cushion some of the hemorrhaging in terms of the liquidity that's there. So it's important. Organization faces people risk. That's a huge one. People come, people go, people are not well trained, people cause problems for the thing, they get into trouble, it causes a problem for the organization. So that's HR risk, people risk is very key and a very important aspect of risk taking. IMF case experience. So many crises I observed were not caused by bold action. Instead, they were caused by delayed action. IMF experienced countries delaying hard decision, what I saw, institutions hiding risk. Working in financial supervision and regulation, this was kind of something that you hear about. So they will tell you that, okay, there are two books that an institution will have. One book for the regulators that they can show you that, okay, here that another book for the business and for the directors that show you a different side. So they actually hide information. Reforms postponed due to political fear. You find that a lot there, once you have a change in political directorate, a different government, they decide that, okay, you know what, let us not continue with this particular reform that is of the past. Let us do this one and so on. And there's a quite clear case in Jamaica. Historically, when one political party comes into power, then all the reforms, all the work with the IMF, World Bank, capacity building, they will kind of throw out most of them and they will start afresh. And so you find that the country was not able to move ahead because they keep, restarting and restarting, depends on which political party is in power. And and because of that, there was a lot of issues, particularly with, in Jamaica, the debt to GDP ratio was very high. It was like 140%. And in 2012, 2013, suddenly the light bulb went on. No, no, no. We have to cooperate. We have to collaborate. This is important. We have to find consensus around these reforms because they are country and be country focused. So they decided both political party, the other pack, they involved the private sector in a public-private sector engagement, and they have an oversight committee now, which includes government but also private sector there to monitor reforms and monitor performance. And ever since, it means that if they have made a pact, they agree that, listen, whichever party is in power, we're going to keep to these conditionalities, we're going to hold strain. And it worked. In 8 years, Jamaica was able to cut its debt from the GDP ratio from 140% down to 65%. It's like miraculous in terms of what the world has seen, and Jamaica became this success story. That when I joined the IMF in 2012, Jamaica was seen as the basket child. We were failing IMF tests. We decided, no, no, we're not going to do that, and so on. This was really, really, really bad. And so even go there, I've kind of, hide a little bit because, I know that Jamaica, my country of birth, was not doing well in that regard. By the time I was leaving the IMF 2021, Jamaica now was not just the basket child, it was the poster child of the IMF. So everywhere IMF go, they talk about Jamaica and how they're able to cut debt to GDP, or they're able to bite the bullet, so to speak, take the bitter medicine, so to speak, to kind of come to this reform. So it's important that we think about that, and that's one of the things that I've learned. Reforms postponed due to political affair, we have to kind of seize that and say, okay, no, let's grab these things and let's take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and let's get it done. Crisis emerging from safe choices is another experience that I had in the IMF. Countries delaying hard decision, like Bermuda, Basel II reform with the capital adequacy that came out from the Basel Capital Accord, the second accord. Basel I was 1988, Basel II 2004, and when it came out, Bermuda at the time, they grabbed it, they looked at it, they said, okay, no, this is going to be beneficial to us. So they implemented Basel II very early in the day. So by 2007, when I joined the Bermuda Monetary Authority, I was the lead for Basel II implementation. They did it, the crisis came, and of course, not that they were unscathed, that is a global financial crisis, but at least they were in a better position. You find that countries that had delayed those hard decisions of implementing these important reforms and these important international standards, they didn't fare as well. There in the Caribbean, we had a crisis there as well called CLICO, where this is a conglomerate, and it had serious issues and problems and failed institution because they decided to delay. And even now, that's one of the lessons that we are learning, because in the Caribbean, in terms of implementation of Basel II, is still very slow. And so we realize that that's almost a time bomb ready to explode in terms of implementation of this stuff. We have to grab the hard decisions and we have to move ahead with that. The cost of not taking risk. What does that look like? Loss of credibility, erosion of trust, sudden crisis instead of a gradual adjustment and missed opportunity windows. So let us not just sit and be inactive. We have to take risks, because not taking risks has a cost. If taking risks have a cost, not taking risks could have even a greater cost, because we could lose credibility that's there. Avoiding discomfort today often creates instability tomorrow. So it's important that we look at that and think about it seriously. Or trust. I mean, like, institution, particularly financial institution, is based on trust. And so if we do not take risks, and when we lead our institutions, when we are part of that and we don't take risks, then that trust can be easily eroded. We lose credibility, nobody believes what we are saying, and so forth. Organizations like central banks, again, is built on trust, and so they have to take risk. And you may think, oh, but that's kind of counterintuitive, because central banks and monetary authority, they should not be taking this risk. But if you don't take calculated and appropriate risk, then you could actually lose credibility, and trust could be easily eroded. Good risk culture in organizations. So, what are some of the areas of healthy risk culture? Strong institutions don't eliminate risk. So, that's the goal. The objectives of strong institution is not to eliminate risk, they manage it intelligently. And so whenever you talk, like I talk about risk assessment and taking risk in 2026, or how you look at risk, you look at that risk management cycle, the risk management cycle, where you actually take on risk. You define what is the risk appetite, then how you identify those risks. So it's important that you look, okay, I'm going to take on risk, I'm gonna do this, but what is it? You have to calculate it up front and say, okay, this is the risk that I'm going to take on based on my appetite. I've identified it, I've measured the risk. How do you measure it? Again, you find different metrics to measure those risks. And think, and the output of the risk. How do you actually mitigate risk? Because that's all a part of taking risk. It's not just to take risk blindly, but you have to look at strategies to identify it, to measure it, to mitigate it, to control it, and to report on it, so that you have a complete risk management loop that's there. Encourage speaking up. So culture, organizing culture that encourage people to speak. You have a voice. Yes, let's hear from you. So that's good. Reward learning, not just success. A learning organization, a learning culture. I mean, that's one of the things that I can really give credit for the Bermuda Monetary Authority, where I'm at, and the IMF, where I work. It was a learning culture that they facilitate. I mean, learning was just so important. I mean, like, learning about like cyber risk. I mean, cyber security is so key. So every so often, every month, we have to do several short courses on cyber risk, learning new ways that attackers or hackers are coming in, trying to steal your information and so forth, passwords, etc. And so it's an ongoing, continuous learning process. And so we should not stop learning, and that's a part of a healthy risk culture. That learning is not something, okay, when I'm in my 20s, then I can do my degree and my MBAs, and in 30s, yeah, I can do some more studies. No, learning is a continuous process in organization, and that's a healthy risk culture. Encourage to speak up, not be afraid of being isolated. You have a voice, everybody has a voice. What you say is important, and you learn to speak up. I remember working with my first stint at the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and this is something that I always encourage. My team. I want you to understand what you do, and I want you to speak up, ask questions. And one thing that I would say to them, that listen, there's no stupid question, there's no dumb question. The reason why you're asking it is because you want to get clarity. And usually, it's the person that is responding to the question that if they're not able to answer it, it means that they really don't know exactly how things work and what they're doing. And I remember, always encouraging my team to do that. And then once they went out on an inspection, on site review, they were reviewing loans. And historically, just one area that wasn't looked in terms of the importance of collateral and underlying of the loans and so on. So I trained the team, say, to go out. When they went to the institution says, okay, why are we looking at that? We never really looked at that before. Why are you looking at collateral? Why you want to do that? I said, no, it's important. And then this person was really very afraid. And so he said, okay, when I said, why are you doing this? He said, okay, it's Courtney asked us to do it. So he didn't quite understand the reason behind it. He wasn't very courageous in terms of his own posture and so on. But it's healthy. It's healthy not to be fearful of speaking up and asking questions and looking at continuous learning. Healthy risk culture distinguish blame from accountability. So it's not just he said, she said, okay, you're to be blamed, who's to be blamed? As soon as an issue come out, it's okay, so who caused that? Who's to blame? Let's see, who did that? No, it's about accountability and how we enshrine and ingrain accountability in our organization and accept uncertainty as normal. Uncertainty is the new normal. There's no such thing again that, okay, this is abnormal, this is normal, and so on. Uncertainty is a part of what we have to deal with every day. So it is a part of the new normal. Leadership is risk taking, making unpopular decision, acting before you have perfect information and perfect data, taking responsibility for outcome and standing alone at times. Can be a lonely road as a leader, because it's really about risk taking. The leader that takes the risk is the leader that will always be successful. The leader that avoid the risk, may not be as successful as that one. Leadership without risk is administration. You're just barely going through the motion. Let me make sure I tick the boxes. I'm doing that. I administer and so on. But leadership with risk is transformation. That's when you see the real transformation in our organization, when we are taking risk in leadership, making leadership decision and taking risk. And again, this has been a kind of recurring theme throughout the thing, standing alone at times, and make sure that we are able to do that. We are comfortable, we are confident, and so even if person are gonna isolate and move away, we are gonna be standing there. I'm gonna stand alone, even if that's what it means. We act in a age of just imperfect data. It's a different world, and so leadership now is not only will be defined as managing, delegating, planning, organizing as function, but risk taking is going to be an important function of leadership, and how do you make unpopular decisions, etc. So let's look at part 4, taking risk in 2026. What has changed? So then there's a new risk environment. Why 2026 is different? New risk environment, climate uncertainty. I mean, like, again, if I use Jamaica as an example, we have had in October, end of October, one of the most devastating hurricane. It was a Category 5 hurricane, the highest that you can get in terms of a hurricane that devastated Jamaica infrastructure, particularly in the western side. Climate uncertainty. It is real. We have seen it, the devastation that it can have. Climate uncertainty. Uh, did you know that weather losses now exceed 300 billion US dollars annually, but less than 40% of those losses are insured? That's something to think about. in terms of the staggering reality of climate uncertainty. In the Caribbean, a single hurricane can wipe out 30 to 200% of GDP overnight. For example, in Dominica in 2017, Hurricane Maria, that was the one. Why this matters for risk framework is important that we look at it. Climate risk validates the core assumption of risk models, stationarity. And so that's something that is important. Digital disruption, again, new risk environment. Before, yes, we used to think about earthquake and hurricane and so on, but now it is more real. Digital disruption, again, is just absolutely mind-boggling. Cyber crime, cyber losses. Can you believe that global cyber crime losses now exceed US 8 to 10 trillion annually? This is larger than the GDP of Japan or Germany. And average financial institution uses over 100 third-party technology providers. And so we can see the basis on which digital disruption is really now a serious game changer in a new risk environment. There's also political or geopolitical fragmentation. Economics is no longer neutral. Hard numbers, number of trade restrictions, industrial policy intervention has increased more than fivefold since 2018, according to the IMF. And the reality is that for the first time since World War II, geopolitics is a first order financial risk. When you talk about the channels and disruptive channels there, what's happening in terms of the war that's there, geopolitical fragmentation going into Venezuela, is just really a serious issue. We see the impact it have on GDP, on inflation in some of these tariffs and trade and geopolitical risks. Faster shocks, shorter response time. One of the things that is it that I want to just kind of bring to you some statistics here. In 2008, the global financial crisis, stress built up over years, so it was building up, they were giving these loans, they're providing incentives for them to get these subprime loans. Over the year, the stress was being built up. Lehman failed after months of visible distress. Lehman Brothers, they failed after months, so it wasn't like overnight. But in 2023, what do you see? The banking stress of 2023, banks run unfold 48 to 72 hours. We talk about the Kenya case of Chase Bank. Over 40 billion withdrawal digitally in a single day from one institution. Silicon Valley, bank there. So it's actually mind-boggling what's happening now in terms of digitization and faster shocks and the transmission of the shocks in terms of what's happening in today's world. Policy reaction functions were designed for weeks back in the day. Now you have to think about supervisor racing algorithms and social media and mobile banking apps to actually respond in terms of that. It's a changing world, different environment that we are in, and so we have to think through these issues differently. The paradox of modern risk. So essentially, we have more data but less certainty. More models that we have, different stress models, different areas to look at it, but we have more surprises. Every day you can almost wake up to a different surprise. Something is new is going to happen. You're not even too sure exactly what it's going to be. More rules, more complexity. Um, and I think, you know, that the era that we are in, so global financial systems now generate what they call zettabytes of data annually. That one zettabyte is 1 trillion gigabyte. It's just a lot of information that's there. But the more data, you have less certainty. You still have heightened uncertainty that's there. In 2006, 2007, regulators had detailed loan level mortgage data, credit bureau scores, sophisticated securitization analytics, yet failed to see systemic collapse forming. And that's the paradox. We have more data, but we have less certainty. We have more models that's supposed to be more sophisticated models, way to capture, to predict, and so on. But we have more surprises, and we have more rules and more complexity. Key lessons from the IMF work that I've done: judgment matters as much as models. And that's why it's important that, we have developed models, risk-based supervision models, risk-based matrices, stress testing models, and so on. But that judgment, that supervisory judgment is very important. And we have to step aside a lot within the IMF context, even now in my work, to say, okay, all right, so the models are showing us this result. The spreadsheets, this result. The risk matrices, this result. But now, what is my gut feeling based on information that's out there, based on some anecdotal evidence on the ground? What are people saying? What social media is going on there, and so on? Judgment matters in this age that we are living in 2026. We have to, listen to our gut more. But this is not just willy-nilly. It's informed, what I call informed gut. We have to listen to that. Context beats templates. What is the context that you are operating with? What are your experiences? Different countries, different contexts. And therefore, you cannot just take one template or one way of doing things. That's okay. Let me just put it on in East Africa and it should work. Let me take something from the Caribbean and put in Tanzania. Let me take something from Tanzania and put it in the Caribbean, and so on. It doesn't work like that. You have to look at the context, you have to look at the experiences, you have to look at the people that's there. It's not just about the templates. Courage is an underappreciated skill. And I really wanted to highlight this one. Courage, an unappreciated skill. A lot of times we don't think about it, but I think, this is a game changer in 2026. The leader that exercise courage, the person that exercise courage really will be those that are going to be succeeding. The organization that's courageous, those are going to be at the top. Institutions are only as brave as their leaders. So again, a leader that is courageous is going to take the institution where they want to go in 2026 and beyond. Risk management today is actually less about personal risk taking. Risk management is where personal risk taking and institutional risk intersect and actually merges. That's there. And risk management is less about prediction and it is actually more about preparedness. How do you understand the culture? How do you plan based on the environment? And how do you actually prepare for it? Then how can I predict? So all these models, that thing. I mean, if you look at it, we always have these predictions. Okay, GDP growth in 2026, 2027 is going to be that 3.3%. Inflation is going to be that, and so on. But you ever do some back testing? So we're past that, and you go back and say, a lot of those predictions, they are not, they don't actually stand up because it is such a time of uncertainty. And so leaders have to be, brave and courageous in terms of taking these risks. So, three questions to ask as we bring the presentation to a close. What happens if I act? What happens if I don't? And who bear the cost of the delay? This simple framework, what happens if I act? What happens if I don't? Who bear the cost? Works at the personal level, at the organizational level, and at the national level. What happens if a country acts based on this particular situation? Cyber security, climate change, digitization, uh, people, empowering the people and capacity building. What happens if a country don't? And we see the differences. What happened when Jamaica act in terms of, okay, let's get it together and let us focus on how we can reduce our GDP? What happened if it didn't? What happened if at a personal level, there's a career move and you got an opportunity to go to another country to do something else? What happens if you act? What happens if you don't? And who bears the cost of the delay? Closing reflection. Better risk taking requires self awareness. Understanding yourself is not the fear, no longer fear of losing your identity, but who am I? And how do I fit within that? My purpose in terms of the organization, what am I here for, how do I plan, how do I succeed, how do I think about continuous improvement and continuous learning. Self-awareness, ethical grounding, and this is very important today, even more than ever. You find that a lot of persons at the personal level have lost their ethical bearing. A lot of organizations have lost their ethical bearing. So they're doing stuff that is not good, not sound, not based on ethics. I mean, one of the important aspect that just studying now, Uniatina, UCAM, and so on, and I realized so much emphasis on ethics in research, ethics in writing, and it's important. It's not surprising that we are seeing it here in the presentation of better risk taking that's requiring ethical grounding. Learning mindset, again, continuous learning. You're not too old to learn. You're not too too professional. You're not at a level where you're not learning. It's a learning mindset. Every day there are new opportunities to learn. Let us grab it, let us hold it, let us seize it, and let us perform. Learning is just so powerful. It is just, there's so much to know, and it's easier today. I remember when I just started out my career, I was working at this organization called Eagle Financial Network, and I had a boss, and my boss was a PhD. He had a PhD in literature. No, this was financial institution, but my boss had a PhD in literature. We were developing, learning modules and so on. So I was doing stuff on risk and credit risk assessment and so forth. But I remember I wanted to do, advanced studies at my BBA, Bachelor in Business Administration diploma. And so I went into him just to get his advice. And I said, "Okay, what do you think? What should I do?" And I remember he just swiveled around in his chair, very eccentric person. And he said, "Courtney, you should maybe do an MBA, not an MBA. Don't do an MBA because I wanted to do an MBA. Do something in philosophy. Do something in literature. Do something outside. You have already done a lot in finance and marketing and management and accounting and so on. Do something out of this stuff." Of course, I didn't really take his advice because I then went on to do my MBA, one MBA, then another MBA. But it was important in terms of what he was saying because it's just that learning mindset. And then he says this, which is very profound. He said, besides, you don't have to think about that. Everything you want to know is in a book. That's a mindset of learning. Everything you want to know is in a book. That was way back in the day. Now, everything you want to know is on the internet. It's in Google. Everything you want to know is in chat GTP. You just ask, but you have that inquisitive, that learning mindset, which is very important in better risk taking, and willingness to be uncomfortable. It's not about being in the comfort zone anymore. It's not about yes, no, I can't do that because that makes me uncomfortable and so on. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable in 2026 and beyond when you're thinking about risk taking. Personal reflection. Every meaningful step in my career required a moment of uncertainty. In 2026, the greatest risk is not failure, it is hesitation. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Courtney. It was really a wonderful session with a lot of, personal experience as well as, insightful informations. So without wasting much of the time, if you want, you can have drink some water.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm good there. Thank you.
Okay. So we have few questions. I'll ask the first one. How can an ordinary person know when a risk is worth taking?
Wow, that's a brilliant question. How can an ordinary person know when a risk is worth taking? Well, I don't know. I'm not gonna try to define an ordinary person, but I think I understand exactly what the question is. You have to do an assessment. So, like in my field, there are risks that there. So, of course, you identify the risk, and that's very important. I mean, you want to know whether it's worth taking. You first have to identify, okay, what is the risk? All right. Then, whether it's worth taking, you have to be able now to go through a kind of a process of what is going to be the impact of this. How do I measure this risk? How do I measure it? How do I know that okay, this is really a very high risk and or a low risk? How do I then look at if something happens, because risk taking is not blind. So if something happens, what are the mitigations I have in place there? So it's not just say, okay, I'm going to take this risk, I'm going to just plunge in there. You have to think about the mitigation, second options, third options, contingency, and so forth. You have to think about how do I control